My husband died years ago. Every month for 5 agonizing years, I sent his mother $200 of my hard-earned money to pay off a debt he supposedly left behind. It was money taken from my son's food, his toys, and our future, all to honor a man I thought was resting in peace. But then, a neighbor whispered a warning that chilled me to the bone, and I saw something on a hidden camera that I couldn't believe. I was backstabbed by the people I called family, and the shocking truth revealed that I wasn't just a grieving widow. I was a victim of a cruel, calculated heist. I felt humiliated and shamed as I realized that the ashes I'd been crying over were nothing but stones and dust. This is a story of family betrayal, infidelity, and a desperate search for justice that led me into the heart of a lie. If you've ever felt like the people you trust most are the ones holding the knife, this is for you. I was cheated out of my life, but I'm here to show you how I fought back and took my vengeance. The truth is finally coming out, and what I found in that abandoned warehouse will change everything you think you know about loyalty. Stick with me, because what happened next is a masterclass in karma. I've lived in this drafty apartment in Chicago for 5 years now, clutching my self-worth like a shield. Every single month, I peel away $200 from my paycheck, money that should be buying my son Malik new sneakers. Instead, it goes to my late husband Julian's parents to settle a $12,000 debt he supposedly left behind. It's my justice, or so I thought, honoring the man I loved while my own bank account stays empty. Being a widow at 32 is a heavy cross, but the family drama makes it feel like I'm drowning. My mother-in-law, Martha, looks at me with such pity when I hand over the cash, calling it a sacred duty. I've been backstabbed by life, yet I keep sacrificing Malik's tutoring money to keep Julian's memory clean and his parents fed. It's a cycle of karma I felt I owed to the universe, never once questioning if the math actually added up. Every time I climb those creaking stairs to their place, I feel like I'm losing a bit of my dignity. $200 might not sound like much to some, but to a single mom, it's the difference between a warm meal and a cold night. I'm reclaiming nothing but guilt, and honestly, the weight of this family betrayal is starting to make my skin crawl. Martha always greets me at the door with a smile that never quite reaches her eyes. The neighbors watch me from behind their curtains as if I'm some kind of tragic character in a shocking play. They see me coming and going, always with that envelope, always looking a little more tired than the month before. They lived here on purpose. Cheap rent, no questions, and the perfect stage for their poor grieving parents act. I've lied to myself, saying this is what a good wife does, even when Malik asks why we can't go to the movies. Yesterday, Martha told me the debt was almost paid, but then she added interest out of thin air. She never showed me a statement, just a number that changed whenever she needed it to, and I let it happen because I was blinded by grief. I felt humiliated, standing there in my old coat while she tucked my hard-earned money into her silk robe. This betrayal of trust started as a whisper in my mind, a tiny doubt that maybe, just maybe, I'm being played for a fool. I walked out of there feeling shamed, my head hanging low as I navigated the dim hallway towards the exit. But then, a floor below, I saw Mrs. Gable standing by her door, her eyes wide and her finger pressed to her lips. She didn't look like her usual gossiping self. She looked genuinely terrified for me, like she knew a secret that was about to break my world apart. She beckoned me closer, her voice a raspy, urgent whistle that cut through the silence. Mrs. Gable pulled me into her kitchen, the smell of burnt toast and old lace hanging heavy in the air. She leaned in, whispering about the truth behind the noises she's been hearing late at night above her head. "Teresa, honey, there's a man," she said, her voice trembling as she described a shadow moving between the floors. I felt backstabbed by my own senses. How could I have missed something so loud and so shocking right above me? She mentioned a new security camera, a sleek black eye positioned perfectly to watch the landing between the 4th and 5th floors. Why would my in-laws need high-tech surveillance in a building that barely has working heat? It felt like a direct hit to my self-worth, knowing they were hiding things while I was struggling to pay their bills. The family drama was shifting from a sad story of loss into a dark, twisted thriller I never signed up for. "I've seen him, Teresa," she continued. "A man with a limp, always arriving when the world is asleep." My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest as she described a figure that sounded hauntingly familiar. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about survival and the creeping feeling that I'd been cheated by the people I called family. Mrs. Gable gripped my hand, her skin like parchment, urging me to look closer before I gave them another cent. The thought of infidelity or some hidden relative crossed my mind, but this felt much more sinister and calculated. I've been humiliated enough by poverty, I wouldn't be mocked by a ghost story or a neighbor's vivid imagination. Yet the way she spoke about the shadowy man made my blood run cold, sparking a need for vengeance I didn't know I had. I needed to know who was walking those stairs while I was home dreaming of a husband who was gone. I left her apartment with my head spinning, the word karma echoing in my ears like a taunt. If they were hiding someone, who was it? And why was my money the price of their secrecy? The betrayal was starting to take a physical shape, a dark silhouette waiting in the corner of my vision. I wasn't going to let this go. I was reclaiming my right to the light, even if it meant facing a nightmare. I knew I couldn't do this alone, so I reached out to the one person who could see through digital walls. My cousin Elias is a wizard with a keyboard, the kind of guy who finds the truth in the lines of code most people ignore. I told him about the camera and the limp, and I could hear his breath hitch on the other end of the line. We set a plan for that evening, a digital stakeout that promised to reveal exactly what was happening behind those closed doors. Elias arrived at my place with a laptop and a grim expression, ready to dig into the building's new digital security. We bypassed the basic encryption, and suddenly, the grainy black and white footage of the fifth-floor landing filled the screen. My hands were shaking, feeling backstabbed by the very air I breathed as the timestamp ticked toward 1 a.m. I couldn't believe I was spying on my own family, but my justice demanded I see what they were hiding. At exactly 1:14 a.m., a figure appeared at the edge of the frame, moving with a heavy, rhythmic struggle. A man in a dark hoodie, his face obscured by a mask, dragged his left leg in a way that made my lungs stop working. It was a limp I had spent 10 years walking beside, a limp that belonged in a grave 3 towns over. I felt shamed for even thinking it, yet the family betrayal was staring me right in the face through a pixelated lens. The man pulled out a key, not a lockpick, but a key, and let himself into my in-laws' apartment with practiced ease. He entered right after I had dropped off the money, almost as if he was waiting for the delivery to be made. I felt cheated of my grief, my 5 years of mourning suddenly feeling like a cruel, elaborate joke. Elias looked at me, his eyes full of a shocking realization that matched the screaming in my soul. "Teresa, that's Julian's gate," Elias whispered, and the word revenge started to pulse in my temples like a drumbeat. The man I had wept for, the man I had been paying debts for, was walking into his parents' home while I lived in a hovel. The infidelity of this lie was so deep, it felt like it had swallowed my entire life whole. I was humiliated on a global scale, a widow paying for a ghost who was very much made of flesh and bone. We watched the footage for 3 nights' worth of recordings, and the pattern was always the same: money in, man in. It was a calculated betrayal, a symphony of greed played by the people I thought were my last link to my husband. My self-worth was shattered, but in its place, a cold, hard desire for vengeance began to solidify. They got careless as the debt neared its end, assuming I'd just keep bowing my head forever. Elias started tracking the camera's IP address, finding it was registered to a burner phone nearby. As he typed, I realized that seeing him on camera wasn't enough to stop the bleeding of my heart. I needed more than a video. I needed to know how deep this family drama went and who else was holding the shovel. Just as Elias was about to close the laptop, a new notification popped up, a bank alert that shouldn't have existed. The bank alert was for a joint account I thought had been closed years ago. It had been dormant for years until it suddenly started moving again. Elias tracked the recent transactions, and my heart sank as I saw Pizza Palace and Liquorland show up on the statement. These weren't the purchases of a grieving elderly couple. These were the spoils of a betrayal feast. I felt backstabbed yet again, realizing my sacrificial money was literally funding their beer and pepperoni nights. I started paying closer attention to the sounds coming from the apartment when I went to visit Martha and Arthur. I'd stand in the hallway for an extra minute, hearing the muffled sound of a television and the clinking of bottles behind the wood. They were lied to my face every time they told me how quiet and lonely the house felt without Julian. The karma they were inviting was going to be a tidal wave, and I was going to be the one to break the dam. I talked to the delivery drivers in the neighborhood, showing them a high-quality wedding photo of Julian. One of them blinked, confused, and said, "Yeah, that guy orders the Grand Slam special every Tuesday. Always asks me to leave it at the back door." He didn't recognize the face first. He recognized the limp, that heavy drag of the left leg. I felt humiliated that a delivery boy knew more about my dead husband's life than I did. My self-worth started to transform into a weapon as I gathered these tiny fragments of a life that shouldn't exist. I found empty beer cans in their communal trash bin that Martha would never touch, expensive imports Julian used to love. The truth was screaming at me from every corner, telling me that I was the only one playing the role of the mourner. I felt cheated of 5 years of my youth. 5 years I could have spent building a real future for Malik. I even caught a glimpse of a shadow behind their curtains late one evening, a silhouette holding a phone. It wasn't the hunched posture of Arthur, it was the broad, arrogant shoulders of the man I had buried in my heart. The shocking audacity of them living it up on my dime, right under my nose, was almost too much to bear. I felt a surge of justice rising in my throat, a bitter but necessary fuel to keep me moving forward. But I needed the ultimate proof, the kind of evidence that no lawyer or cop could ever ignore or explain away. If Julian was alive, then whose ashes were sitting in that ornate urn in the town cemetery? I packed a small bag and told Malik we were going on a little trip to see his father's resting place. As I drove toward the Illinois countryside, the word vengeance felt like a cold wind blowing through the open window, leading me toward a grave that held a secret. Before hitting the cemetery, Elias sent me one last piece of the puzzle, a deep dive into Martha and Arthur's actual finances. It turned out their state pension was sitting completely untouched in a high-yield savings account, accumulating thousands while I struggled. To them, I wasn't family. I was just funding for their golden child. I felt backstabbed by their greed, a family drama fueled by the most basic of human sins. This revelation gave me a new sense of dignity. I wasn't just a victim of a lie, I was the victim of a heist. The betrayal was financial, emotional, and spiritual, a triple threat designed to keep me under their thumb. I couldn't believe how they could look at their grandson, Malik, and still take the money meant for his future. This was karma in its purest form, waiting to be unleashed on people who had forgotten what it meant to be human. Seeing the balance on their secret account made me realize they were planning something big, something that required a clean break. The plan was to stay close, keep everything controlled, and disappear for good once the final amount was reached. They were likely waiting for that $12,000 debt to be fully paid before they vanished with my husband. I felt humiliated thinking about all the times I apologized for being late with a payment. The bank records showed transfers to a third party, a name I recognized from Julian's old poker nights, Darius. It seems the debt I was paying wasn't to Julian's parents at all, but to a fixer who helped him disappear. This level of infidelity to our marriage and our life was a shocking blow to my soul, but it only made my resolve harder. I was reclaiming my power, one bank statement and one dirty secret at a time. I felt cheated. Yes, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity I hadn't known since the day of the accident. The vengeance I was seeking wasn't just for the money. It was for the years of tears I'd shed over an empty coffin. I was no longer the girl who was shamed by her husband's failures. I was the woman who was going to make sure every single person involved in this fraud felt the cold steel of accountability. As I pulled up to the cemetery gates, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, skeletal shadows over the headstones. I walked toward the family plot, with a heavy tool bag hidden in my coat, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached the urn, which was kept in a private family niche away from prying eyes, making it easy to work in secret. My hands trembled as I reached for the seal, knowing that what stayed inside would either break me or set me free forever. The marble felt freezing under my fingertips as I worked the heavy seal, my breath hitching in the quiet afternoon air. When the lid finally gave way with a sickening crack, I didn't see the fine gray remains of the man I loved. Instead, I stared down at a pile of common gravel and construction dust, a shocking mockery of my 5 years of grief. I felt backstabbed by the very earth beneath my feet. The death was a total, absolute stage production. I stood there in the silence, the wind whistling through the trees as the weight of the family betrayal crushed the last bit of my sadness. There was no husband to mourn, only a ghost who had cheated death and left me to pay the bill. I felt humiliated for every prayer I'd whispered to this pile of rocks, every tear I'd dropped on this fake grave. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a soul-deep betrayal that required a legendary payback. I couldn't believe the lengths they went to, even faking a cremation to ensure I'd never ask for an autopsy or a second look. The family drama had reached its peak, and I was standing on the summit of a lie that spanned years. My self-worth surged back into me like a lightning strike, burning away the widow identity I'd been forced to wear. This was about justice now, and I was going to be the judge, the jury, and the one who brought the hammer down. I took a photo of the rocks and the dust, my hands finally steady as the cold reality of karma settled over me. Martha and Arthur weren't just grieving parents, they were accomplices in a crime that had stolen my life and my son's security. I felt shamed no longer. That emotion belonged to them, and I was going to hand it back with interest. The vengeance I felt wasn't hot and angry. It was a calculated, icy resolve to see them all behind bars. I drove away from that cemetery without looking back, the sacred urn now nothing more than a trash can full of pebbles. The truth was finally in my hands, and it was heavier and sharper than any stone. I called Elias and told him we weren't just watching a camera anymore. We were hunting a criminal. I needed to find where Julian was hiding when he wasn't sneaking into his parents' kitchen to eat the food my money bought. Elias had already found a lead, a warehouse on the outskirts of the Chicago suburbs registered to Darius, Julian's old friend. The GPS coordinates blinked on my phone like a heartbeat, leading me toward the final confrontation. I felt a sense of dignity returning as I realized I was finally in control of the narrative. I was headed toward the Covil du Monstro, and I was bringing a recording device and a heart full of fire. The warehouse was a skeletal structure of rusted metal and broken glass, tucked away in an industrial zone where the city's secrets go to die. I watched from a distance as a black SUV pulled up, and out stepped a man I recognized instantly, Darius. He was wearing a watch that caught the moonlight, a gold piece that was supposed to be at the bottom of the river with Julian's crashed car. I felt exposed to the scale of their lies, seeing the spoils of our life on the wrist of a criminal. Darius didn't look like a man in mourning. He looked like a man who was about to close a very profitable deal. My self-worth demanded I move closer, to see the face of the man who helped orchestrate my family betrayal. The vengeance in my veins was the only thing keeping me warm in the biting midnight air. I felt cheated out of the peace I deserved, but I was reclaiming my life with every step I took toward that building. I saw him enter through a side door, and I signaled Elias, who was monitoring the area's local Wi-Fi signals from his car a block away. This wasn't just a family drama anymore. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse where the dead were the most dangerous players. I couldn't believe I was actually doing this, but the truth was worth the risk of being caught. I felt humiliated for being the poor widow for so long, and that shame turned into a tactical advantage. Elias buzzed my phone, confirming that 3 separate devices were active inside the warehouse: Darius, a burner phone, and a tablet. One of those had to be Julian's, the digital fingerprint of a man who thought he was a ghost. The karma was coming for him, and he had no idea I was standing in the shadows, recording every move. This was the justice I had been paying for with my $200 installments, and it was finally time to collect. I crept toward a low-hanging window, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Inside, I could see crates and boxes, but in the center, there was a small living area with a bed and a television. It was a hideout, a place for someone to wait until the heat died down and the debts were settled. I felt shamed that I had ever loved a man capable of such a shocking level of cruelty toward his own wife and child. Then I heard it. The sound of a familiar laugh, a deep, raspy sound that used to make me feel safe. It was coming from the back of the room, followed by the clink of glasses and the smell of cheap cigars. I adjusted my phone's microphone, praying it would catch the words that were about to change my life again. I was about to walk into the heart of the betrayal, and I wasn't leaving until I had the confession that would burn their world down. I pressed my phone against the glass, the recording icon glowing like a tiny red eye in the dark. Inside, Julian was sitting on a crate, looking healthier and more arrogant than I'd ever seen him. He was laughing with Darius about how easy it had been to play the grieving parents card to keep the cash flowing. I felt backstabbed by every word, each sentence a jagged piece of family betrayal cutting into my heart. "Teresa's so predictable," Julian sneered, taking a long swig from a bottle that my money probably paid for. "Tell her a sob story about a debt, and she'll work herself to the bone to pay it off. She actually thinks I'm a saint." My self-worth screamed in protest, but I kept the phone steady, capturing every shocking admission of his fake death. I felt humiliated, but the evidence was gold, and I was finally getting my justice. He went on to explain how he'd planned to flee to South America once the last installment was paid next month. He didn't mention me or Malik with love. We were just assets he'd liquidated to fund his new cowardly life. The karma was vibrating in the air as he joked about the stones in the urn being a nice touch by his father. I felt cheated of a husband, but I was reclaiming the woman who would never be fooled again. Darius laughed, asking if he'd missed the kid, and Julian just shrugged, saying, "Malik's better off thinking his dad's a hero than knowing the truth." That was the moment my sadness turned into a cold, lethal desire for vengeance. This wasn't just infidelity to me. It was a betrayal of his own blood, a crime against his own son. I couldn't believe I had ever shared a bed with this monster, this man who had lied so effortlessly. I had it all: the voice, the face, the plan, and the clear admission of the fraud involving his parents. The family drama was about to end in a courtroom, not a cemetery, and I was the one holding the key to his cell. I felt a surge of dignity as I realized I had outplayed him in his own game of shadows. I backed away from the window, my feet light as air, knowing that the dead man was about to have a very rude awakening. I made it back to the car where Elias was waiting, his face pale from what he'd heard through the live feed. "We have enough," he whispered, and I nodded, my eyes fixed on the warehouse that was about to become Julian's prison. We didn't call the parents. We didn't call the friends. We called the one person who could make this legal and final. The next morning, the sun would rise on a world where the justice was finally, undeniably mine. The police raid was a blur of blue lights and the heavy thud of boots against the warehouse floor. I stood behind the barricade, my arms crossed, watching as they dragged Julian out in handcuffs, his dead face pale with terror. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the man I used to love. But he was gone, replaced by a coward. This was my payback, my vengeance, and the sweetest taste of justice I had ever known. Martha and Arthur were arrested at their apartment at the same time, their pension accounts frozen, and their house of lies collapsed. They were charged with fraud, forgery, and conspiracy, a family betrayal that would cost them their remaining years. I felt stripped of my past, but the law was finally on my side, and the karma was being served in handcuffs. I stood tall, reclaiming my dignity in front of the neighbors who had pitied me. The lawyer Elias helped me find was a shark, already filing for total restitution of every cent I'd sent them over the years. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the self-worth they tried to steal by making me feel like a perpetual debtor. The shocking details of the Urnstones made the local news, turning the poor widow narrative into a story of a woman's triumph. I felt humiliated for the last time as the truth finally replaced the whispers. Julian tried to claim he was forced into it, but my recording of his laughter and his plans to flee destroyed his defense. He was cheated of his freedom by his own arrogance, a fitting end for a man who lied to his wife and child. The infidelity to our life was finally being punished, and Malik would grow up knowing his mother was the one who fought for him. I felt a deep, resonant sense of justice that reached into my very bones. Darius was caught trying to board a flight, the gold watch still on his wrist, a final piece of evidence in their grand scheme. The family drama was being dissected in a courtroom, and every person who participated in my pain was now paying the price. I didn't feel joy exactly, but I felt a profound sense of peace, the kind that only comes when the truth is finally loud enough. I was finally, legally, and spiritually free from the man who died twice. The sentencing was quick, a series of years and fines that ensured they would never bother me or my son again. I walked out of the courthouse with Malik's hand in mine, the sun feeling warmer than it had in 5 long years. The betrayal was a scar, but it was a scar I wore with pride because I was the one who survived. I looked at my son and realized that our real life was just beginning, far away from the shadows of the past. We left Illinois entirely and moved to a new state, a place with more parks and less history, using the restitution money to put a down payment on a small, sunlit house. I'm no longer the widow in the drafty apartment. I'm a woman who knows the value of her own self-worth. Every morning I wake up and realize I don't owe anyone a single cent of my soul or my paycheck. This is the justice I fought for, the quiet after a 5-year-long storm. Malik is thriving in his new school, finally getting the sneakers and the basketball camp he deserved all along. He doesn't ask about the debt anymore, and he knows his father isn't coming back, not because of a crash, but because of a choice. We've moved past the family drama and the betrayal, building a world where the word family actually means something. I've found my dignity again, and it's stronger than any lie Julian ever told. Sometimes I think about the urn and the stones, and I realize that the man I loved really did die 5 years ago. The person in that prison cell is a stranger, a shadow who never deserved the payback of my hard work and tears. I've stopped feeling shamed by the past. I'm too busy being proud of the future I'm building with my own 2 hands. The karma worked its magic, and I'm the one who came out on top. I've met new people, made new friends who don't know me as the tragic widow, but as the woman who knows how to spot a lie a mile away. My vengeance is living well, a silent but powerful statement against everyone who tried to keep me down. I feel reclaiming my joy is the ultimate victory over the infidelity and greed that tried to consume me. The truth is, I'm more alive now than I've ever been, and that's a shocking realization in itself. No more $200 envelopes, no more suspicious neighbors, and no more fake graves, just me, my son, and a wide-open horizon. I've learned that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about the freedom to breathe without a heavy weight on your chest. I was backstabbed by the people who should have loved me most, but I used those knives to cut my way out of the trap. I am free, and for the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am. Looking at the sunset from my new porch, I feel a sense of completion I never thought possible. The Family Betrayal is a chapter in a book I've already finished reading and put back on the shelf. I've learned that even when you're humiliated and cheated, you can still find the strength to demand the life you deserve. My journey is proof that even from the ashes of a lie, you can grow a truth that is beautiful and permanent. This story is a reminder that the truth always finds a way to the light, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. I spent years in the dark, but reclaiming my self-worth was the best justice I could ever receive. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered a family betrayal that turned your world upside down? Have you ever felt backstabbed by those who were supposed to protect you? Comment below with your own stories of karma and survival. Your reflections might be the strength someone else needs to hear today. Don't let the shadows win. Speak your truth, and let's discuss how we can all find justice in a world full of secrets. Do you think I was too hard on them, or was my vengeance exactly what they deserved? If this journey moved you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and activate the notifications. You don't want to miss our next deep dive into the complex world of family conflicts and shocking revelations. Stay tuned for more insights that will challenge your perspective and help you navigate the toughest betrayals life can throw at you.